My name is Tony Fry. I'm speaking to you from Tasmania in Australia. What I have to say focuses on the complexity of change by looking at abandonment, Cosmo-technics, and the refiguration of the global south as they enfold each other. To do this, I first need to put this complexity into a larger frame of complexity that frames it. I'm going to start with a grand claim. No matter who or where we are, we all now exist in a moment of epochal change. Our existence in difference is poised between the past and the present ways of being and knowing, and the ways becoming futural or demand. So we're at a very critical moment. To be able to deal with this, we need to have a view of how we position the future. How does one talk about the future? Recognizing that it's fluid, contested, and experienced in situations of temporal difference. So you can ask, whose future? Recognizing this requires acknowledging it is constituted by the present and returns from the past, while acknowledging this view of continual return is deemed Eurocentric and associated with Nietzsche's notion of chronophobia, an illusion of permanence and the fear of time. So no matter how the future is thought, and by no means it's thought universally and uniform, our species now exists in a condition of temporal betweenness in relation to the past and the future. A short way to express this is that we are collectively positioned between the end times and the times to come. The actuality of the situation is that as an envelopment in the complexity of a compounding crisis, we find ourselves in this condition of planetary change, in which everyone is specifically situated in their times and the space, in the in-between, almost knowingly, yet while experiencing the temporal disjuncture as a feeling of unsettlement. Attempts to characterize this moment by totalizing overarching concepts like the Anthropocene do not capture the intertwined doubling dynamic and trajectory of being in crisis. All available modes of representation fail to gather, that is, bring together and comprehend what is in process. So just to reiterate again, the future is not empty. It's partly populated by all that's been cast into it from the past and all that is imminent from the present. Induced climate change not only graphically makes this point materially and grounds chronophatic fear, but also opens to a continually expanding relational condition of causality evoked by climate change, which is one causal generative force of the complexity in which we are immersed. Degraded natural environments, increasing areas of planetary becoming uninhabitable, population displacement, the reduction of biodiversity, crisis of food security, increasing competition for natural resources, serious health impacts, all add to geopolitical tension and conflict. And these are just some of the non-discrete elements that weave a complexity that is distant and not knowable by existing divisions of knowledge. Such change is not situated in time as a temporal condition, as a medium, and as a state of urgency. And in the context of the current interglacial cycle of warming. This cycle is destined to continue for several thousand more years. In this respect, anthropogenic induced global warming is amplifying an existing geoclimatic recurrent cycle. If designated as a problem, it is one for which there is no solution, although mitigation and adaptation responses are essential. It is not possible to fully recognize the complexity of this complexity, or the relational configurations of the ontic totality of which the sum of our species agency and its creations are a part. Yet this tumultuous, unsettling transition that we find ourselves in is our location in time. In recursivity and contingency, Yohei writes of being preserved as a dynamic structure whose operation is open to the incoming of contingency, namely becoming. While being as such is futural, there is also an oncoming that is not becoming but negation, a negation that defutures. The recursive relation between creation and destruction, that is life, is increasingly unstable. In a more explicit term, sustainment, modes of being have been denaturalized and made unsustainable. Technology and the naturalized artificial bridge this divide. Rather than further abstractly addressing this complexity, I want to ground it in a set of fragmented relations that themselves are complex and suggest elements for an unfolding future that invites consideration. So I'm going to talk about being now, partly in the kind of context of being as feeling helpless. Is not helplessness fundamental to and constitutive of the lacuna intrinsic to the divide between the absolutely critical and institutionalized politics and governments? Is not helplessness conjunctural and demanding to be addressed by the Academy? Recalling Bill Redding's 1996 address to the university or the Academy in ruins, we really function out of that condition with the addition of the increased hegemonic instrumentalism, which is arise subsequently to Redding's view. So this is the background I'm working from. And I want to come at it really from a series of considerations that are actually emergent fusions of the actual and the speculative. There are 5. The first, consider the World Climate Portal, which is a conservative future climate projection that is by no means the most radical perspective. It states that by 2050, the increase in global warming will have reached 2.32 degrees centigrade, and by 2021, it will have risen to 2.7 to 3.4 and be rising. Some of the global climate models go out to 2300. They all show an increase in warming. That is as far as the projection goes. But going back to the interglacial warming, as mentioned, it will continue for several thousand years. So effectively, what's happening is global warming is simply amplifying an existing condition. What this begs, and why I mention it, is where do we start to try to think in time in relation to this problem? The next consideration, the IPCC International Panel on Climate Change has indicated it's possible that 1 million people will be displaced by 2050. By 2100, a third of the global population could share this fate. It's possible that these numbers could be lower or higher. Either way, the situation is going to be, in fact, already is, serious. But how to imagine it? Next consideration. The equator passes through North, South America, southern part of Central Africa, across the middle of the islands of Indonesia, and life above and below the equator will vie between being the unbearable and the impossible in coming decades. Huge numbers of people will be abandoned and displaced. Borders will break down. There will be conflict. Some nations will collapse. An underestimation or an exaggeration? Is certain that the situation, as I said, is serious. The next consideration. Economies and agricultural systems will fail. Significant areas of the planet will become uninhabitable. There will be issues of major food security crises. There will be conflict. The cost of these impacts will be massive and negatively transform the global economy. An open question. Is there a problem of concealment here? How do we discover what actually are the risks? The next consideration. The global population will fragment in likely 3 unevenly divided constituencies, each reflecting a condition of geopolitical instability. A caveat. Listing is neat, reality is messy. The 3 divisions don't necessarily exist in a condition of complete separation. So the first one, the advancement of some form of sphere of techno-protection populated and commanded by corporations, the privileged and the elites, is a possible future. Here I'm evoking Peter Sloterdijk's notion of spheres, while also pointing to increasing technological inequity. So this is one possible future for some. The next is the rise of adaptive masses. This is the condition of becoming becoming majority. Variable in their difference, diverse in their situated contexts. So that's very different from the dominant technological picture of a minority. And then the third fragment, which is the one I'm going to focus on, these other 2 are addressed elsewhere, is that of the displaced and the abandoned, which will receive immediate attention and be linked to Cosmo-technics and how mass abandonment is configuring the global south. Abandonment due to the impacts of climate change and related contexts and conflicts is emergent. As indicated, the numbers of the displaced will be massive, but variable according to the severity of conditions. The situation will be serious within just a few decades and will extend over an unknown duration and be accompanied by many related impacts. People will move because where they live has become uninhabitable, too hot. As a result of conflict, another force to move. And also as a result of their land and water being taken from them by force, they will leave looking for food, water, and shelter. They will arrive in cities, cross borders en masse, uninvited, occupy farms. Their presence will replicate conflict of ancient times, in that the history of war began with a conflict between the nomadic and the settled. That is going to be part of our future. Managing such numbers of people will be beyond the existing capacity of the United Nations and NGOs. The economic impact of associated failures of agricultural systems, humanitarianism, and national security will be enormous. In some respect, the abandoned reflect the existential of our species as experienced by our most ancient ancestors, who had nothing but what they could find materially in their environment, their knowledge, imagination, and what they could make. Obviously, what evolving hominoids knew is vastly different than contemporary displaced people. Yet, in both cases, the same thing was and is at stake: survival by the exercise of the capabilities of body and mind in pertaining circumstances. This has always been true. I remember meeting an old lady in a cardboard box she was living in Sao Paulo, in Brazil. All she had was what she found on the street. But she made a world for herself with tin cans, found plastic cutlery, a carpet of rags, and pictures torn from a magazine pinned on the walls of her box. Here was an inherent prefigurative ability that every one of us has to claim and to humanize the environment by prefigurative intent, that is, by design. So, in a sense, what I'm saying is that when we have nothing, we have what we can find and what we can design and make with it, no matter what degree of poverty is experienced. So this takes me to Cosmo-technics, takes me to the ability to prefigure, be it unevenly endowed between us. It will be central to the future and the fate of the abandoned to survive. It will be indivisible from the historicity of the practices authored by their cosmology. As anthropologist Eduardo Veras de Castro makes clear, practices are the expressive form of a cosmology. As such, it arrives not as articulated belief, nor a narrative worldview, but as social and material practices that replicate the collective occupied and operational life world in which they exist. Here then, within these practices, is a Cosmo-technics of world making at its most fundamental. The diversity of the abandoned, their state of well-being, the immediate ability to sustain themselves, their knowledge and skills at the level of the resources of the environment in which they drift will largely be thrown together by fate. Luck and determination will be decisive. In their particular situated context of loss, their cosmotechnical memory and technical ability will determine the potentiality for a technology of bricolage and the transformational possibility of things by mind, seeing otherwise and making them so. The challenge will be enormous, but not completely new, especially for those who come from informal settlements. Not all will survive. There will be injustice and violence. The dialectic of sustainment will rule at its most basic. That is, whatever is created will also be at the cost of what is destroyed. Here is the essence of unthinking at the core of unsustainable action, the forgetting of destruction that comes to define the universal cosmology of Anthropos, the imposed human that has understood colonialism, and the negation of the cosmology of indigenous others, as it defined their being indifference as that to be erased. Now to reconfigure thinking around the global south. As the north and the south transgress and enfold each other, it is impossible to know in any detail what the consequences of the global presence of the abandoned will actually be in its sudden and normal formation, a dynamic of migration as it gains pace. There is no neat geography. Geography is in a condition of itself fragmentation. The current construction of the binary of the global north will likely rupture. The global south itself will fragment. Some, maybe many nations will implode economically as the abandon overwhelm their response capacity. The already post-geographic relation of the north within the south and the south within the north will grow. As populations redistribute, there will be a dramatic increase in this division. The change which is underway, the continuous compounding of problems, the negating of futures, the complexity in which the disorders implicated and forms, and the extent of the uncertainty that unsettles cannot be fully grasped, that is, understood and held. The reductive sensibility remains widely held and still deems what is critical as a problem for which a solution must be sought. But in many ways, the unfolding ontological condition designated as problems to confront are not amenable to solutions. Problems cannot be ignored in a state of resigned acceptance, Hassenheit. Rather, they beg a response, and it will be dominantly one of adaptation. So, to conclude, going back to our species origin, three primary forces combined and made us indifferent: climate and food, growth movement, and distributed us globally. And also adaptive change in our evolving and physically cognitive developing conditions. To put it at its absolute simplest, we are climate and what we eat. And then there is the third force, making and technique. Making marks, sound, things, relations, gathered as knowledge and techniques. Obviously, have been a major force of our transformation and the transformation of the world that we subsequently made. As climate change changes, so will we. either by submission or resistance. As the climate changes also will we redistribute. This process of redistribution has already started. As for making, its ontologically significance and agency regress in one direction into the most basic Cosmo-technics, and another, the other direction, into a transhuman mutation with an enormous diversity in the in-between. Effectively, the pursuit of singularity is equally generative of our species' pluralization. So, the relation to abandonment, the condition of reconfiguration of the global north and the global south, and the condition that over determines those two relations in relation to us is an unfolding, not just an unfolding condition, but an unfolding narrative, indivisible from our fate resting with the abandoned. It is not possible to dislocate ourselves from this future. Thank you.